some sort of first take. I'm very excited to get my hands on this software. It's a bit buggy right now, but I believe that there might be a good amount of promise in terms of using it in the future for just sort of exploring different historical vintage Cold War scenarios as well as modern ones. I do not know exactly how the software is architected, but this new title, Nuclear War Simulation, I believe, was just released today, and it's by a single developer, single person developer. And it really reminds me of games from the late 90s, early 2000s. Well, not really games, but there was, I believe there was a game entitled Weapons of Mass Destruction in the 80s, and similar games, war games, I think, based nominally off the movie, had its own sort of title. Well, there are actually two sort of war game titles. One was the War Games, not to be confused with Eugen's War Game. It's based off of the movie, the real-time strategy game, which was like a semi-sequel that had robots and things. And that was, I think, released in the late 80s. And then there was a more proper, I think, independent developer that titled their sort of nuclear strategy simulation game after the film as well. This one is, I suspect, designed to be more of a simulator than a game for entertainment. Indeed, I don't really know how entertaining the subject matter really is. It's a bit morbid, but we are fascinated by morbid things, and so here we are. I've had a few minutes to sort of explore some of the UI here. I think there'll be a second or third video where I explore the scenarios, tutorials more. And after I've had some time to sort of dissect the UI, and hopefully, as the developer has fixed some of the bugs, which I'll sort of identify as we go forward in this sort of small survey of the software as it is on the release date. I think there'll be a lot of really interesting things we can do, especially around vintage, again, vintage Cold War sort of scenario visualization. I think this could be a very, very interesting tool for historians or enthusiasts in this area. Uh, in fact, I'll probably explore a couple of these. Well, I think this is probably the only software, but there's also an open source software design in Python that sort of talks about or is about nuclear war strategy that I think might warrant some special video series. Just to just to be clear, we're not going to change the focus in the channel to be doing Python programming, but I wanted to definitely expand the scope while still keeping the theme of the channel firmly within sort of these real-time tactical games, with Eugen's Steel Division and Warno being the preeminent examples of this subgenre, though there are now several other titles being released in the not too distant future. I think that, at least for the time being, Eugen remains king in this arena with respect to that subgenre. So let's go forward. This is a software that obviously allows you to visualize and explore different dynamics of nuclear war, and so far that we can call nuclear war war. The I haven't mastered really everything, or even a percent of the software. It was just released like an hour or two ago, but I think it'll be interesting to look at some of these sort of pre-built scenarios and see how they play out. There's one that's interesting given given the time of that we live in, which is the first quarter of 2023. The Russian-Ukrainian war is still ongoing. And as for those of you who follow the news, I'm sure you understand that we had a bit of a scare a few months prior where there was a threat or an implied threat of nuclear escalation um, by the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. There was also obviously a threat of nuclear counter-escalation or maybe escalation also by several members of the Western Alliance, NATO in this case, warning that if any nuclear weapon was used by the Russian forces in Ukraine theater of operations, that NATO would quote unquote respond. Now, this is an interesting statement because, from a background standpoint, if you had even watched a tenth of the news in the media in the past few weeks, or a few weeks after these sort of implied threats were made by the respective leaders, you had a lot of analysis done by these these outlets: CNN, BBC, MSNBC, etc., Fox News, and I felt, having not obviously being a formal strategist in nuclear war, I suspect there aren't many of those left, but just being saying a passive observer and someone who, as a human being on this planet, is interested or has a vested interest in whether or not nuclear war is actually executed by any nation. I felt that the analysis that was provided by these outlets were pretty subpar. Many of the scenarios amounted to something like this: the Russian Federation would deploy a nuclear weapon either in the Black Sea as a sort of warning, or they would deploy theater level, or not theater level, or tactical grade nuclear weapons. Tactical and strategic being different grades or different tonnages, I suppose. Um, and then NATO forces would do one of two things. They would intervene conventionally, and most of those scenarios that were talked about in the news outlets, uh, you know, hypothesized that a response could be a massive air campaign by alliance or NATO forces, air forces, as well as a complete dismemberment of Russia's Black Sea fleet using long-range naval missiles, uh, and that this would, effectively um, cut out the ability of Russia's potency, or the ability to engage in offensive or even defensive war, and they would be forced to de-escalate and retreat either to the Donbass and these other so-called breakaway republics from Ukraine, or just to retreat the theater entirely. Um, that is a very interesting idea, and I can't really, and I don't think it's the scope of this video to discuss the veracity of it from an analytics standpoint. But I would say that, just from like a common sense perspective, it's unclear why the escalation would stop at that moment. It seems to me that uh, the Russians, if they were to lose so much of their armed forces, they would be be at risk, or be perceived, at least they would perceive themselves to be at risk of imminent strikes, conventional or otherwise, on their home territories. And it seems to me that their response would likely be to deploy nuclear weapons on those nations that participated on the conventional strike. And this is where I think the analysis failed mostly in the media, which is it failed to entertain that possibility as an absurdity. Um, and I think there's a probably future video to sort of deconstruct this more analytically, to see whether that eventuality, or not eventuality, but possibility, is really absurd or not. I think that's a very interesting question. Well, in any event, I've been meandering about this. Now let's go ahead and move forward through the scenario. I think this is interesting. So let's go ahead and read the software author's description of this scenario: European escalation. Interesting. As you know, Eugen's first war game, which was based off of the late 1970s Cold War scenarios, was actually subtitled European Escalation. So that's a very, I think, apt title, although in this case, the European escalation described is a bit different. Uh, so in this fictional scenario, Russian forces are suffering a conventional defeat after the invasion in Ukraine. Facing internal pressure, the Russian leadership is deciding to use one tactical nuclear weapon to blackmail Western countries into giving up support for Ukraine. Later, several nuclear weapons are used on the battlefield in an attempt to stop the Ukrainian advance. And it looks, we see here a map, and I don't honestly keep that detailed of a view of the, or understanding the nuclear of the current, as of the first quarter 2023, the Ukrainian war. So I don't know how realistic or how relevant this map is. It seems roughly sort of in line. I think this is Kiev, and so I guess they're showing. I guess those arrows are conventional forces or their general trajectories. So this seems sort of similar, and there's Crimea in the south. The United States Navy is then attacking Russian targets in Crimea and the Black Sea using conventional weapons. Russia responds to it by attacking the railroad infrastructure that is used to supply weapons, from Poland to Ukraine. The conflict then escalates into an all-out nuclear exchange between NATO and Russia. On the Russian side, this scenario includes not only strategic but also tactical nuclear weapons, which are usually in storage and are only deployed in conflict. Interesting. So I think we'll probably go ahead and try the scenario now, but we will probably revisit many of these scenarios in much greater detail, and hopefully once we have understood the software again, we will be able to deconstruct it more from an analytic level. So let's go. So it is now loading. All right, so we have this UI. Let me just sort of point it out here. All right. Oh, the action's already begun. Okay, so it looks like, so I believe those were tactical grade nuclear weapons. We're now seeing, okay, we're seeing the US Navy deployed in the Black Sea Fleet, striking at the Russian Black Sea Fleet in response of those weapons being destroyed. Looks like they're making short work of the Black Sea Fleet. Now, where else is, let's see, it looks like much of the fleet has been destroyed with only one icon left in the Black Sea. Doesn't seem like anything else has happened globally or within the European theater. Russian responds by attacking the railroad infrastructure into Poland. Okay, let's move quickly. Oh, I missed that. I apologize. So looks like they've struck western Ukraine. Now we are seeing NATO Air Force doing sorties, conventional sorties on Russian military targets, airfields. And okay, we are now seeing sorties from the interior, it looks like. Oh, there we go. The first volley of nuclear weapons are now being deployed on Western Europe. Looks like a few hit Poland, Germany, and England. United States responds, so this is a counter response. I presume those first responses were at non-city targets. It looks like the United States is also engaging in, and we're going to have to rerun these to make sure, but I suspect that the initial volleys were at, oh wow, this is escalating quickly. Now we are seeing a full nuclear response, and I suspect the United States will begin its counterstrike. It should, oh wow, it looks like, I see. So what I believe we are seeing here is the Russian attempt to destroy the ICBM inbound land arsenal, and enough of those have survived, and of course SLBMs have survived to do a counterstrike on the Russian territories, and those have, again, this is very disconcerting. Okay. So let's see about the United States. Most of the Northeast has been hit. It's West Coast. Another strike. U.S. strategic bombers from Missouri and parts of the Midwest have now started their approach, presumably hitting Russian targets. Likewise, Russian strategic bombers seems to also be deployed, although their sorties now are moving into Western Europe, and I guess that makes sense. I don't know if any sorties are moving into the polar. Yes, so at least one icon right here, most likely heading for North America. I'm not sure. Oh my goodness. London has been hit. Paris has been hit several times. This is very disconcerting indeed. Berlin looks like it's been hit several times. Smoke is emanating. And this is unfortunate. The software does not have the casualty and damage models. It does not, apparently is not implemented or buggy. We cannot actually see the current fatalities of this conflict. I presume the author, as you can see, I presume it's all zero. I presume the author will have this fixed. Again, this is the opening day. This is the first day. So now what is happening is, yes. So we have strategic bombers from the Russian Federation moving up through the North Sea, and they're now heading towards North America. U.S. strategic bombers are moving up the North Pole, and let's see. I don't have an understanding of what the current damages are. We witnessed what looked like a full strike on European capitals and several infrastructure, but we do not see these numbers change. Presumably, once the software is fixed and patched up, these numbers will dynamically change. We'll be able to witness the casualty models, which I suspect will be pretty horrific. Um, it's not something that we want to think about. And likewise, I'm sure the Russian Federation has also experienced tremendous damages and loss of life. A tragedy on both, on really on all respects if this were to actually happen in reality. Would not wish it to happen, of course. Not in our wildest dreams would we wish this to happen. But let's see. It doesn't seem like there's any further actions. And in fact, I'm not really sure what phase or what the strategy. Oh, this is interesting. Sorry, just this icon. This is I think these are mobile weapons, mobile land-based mobile missiles. I wonder if in the game these will be able to move, albeit in this scale, any kind of movement would be trivial, so might not be relevant. It'd be interesting if they had any kind of rail moved nuclear weapons as well, because that was also. Now I'm unclear what these smaller icons are. They might be tactical grade weapons, or sort of like within theater grade weapons. I'm not sure, but they definitely do seem to be nuclear weapons. But they're different from the ones that go into orbit. Uh, so Warsaw was just hit, and that was definitely what a weapon would look like, a nuclear weapon. Let's see. Have the Russian bombers? Yep. So I see. So the Russian bombers, these are coming out of the strategic bombers. You see there, the Russian strategic bomber unloaded its missiles, and then now it's heading back. Heading back to what? I'm not really sure. I suspect many of those airfields are now totally destroyed, but they're heading back to whatever future they may have. Same with the United States bombers. These bombers are going to unload their payload and going to head back. Maybe ditch their plane somewhere somewhere remote, somewhere where the fallout hopefully won't reach them and they have a fighting chance. I am not so certain what Yeah, I mean, you can clearly see smoke. Smoke is being simulated here, so, and you don't see any further. Oh, you do see some what looks like NATO sorties. Not many. I suspect not many of the assets, the air forces within the combined NATO air forces likely survived that. What we witnessed a bit earlier. Um, I'm not sure if this is a bug or not, but looks like there's a couple of jets. They might just sort of be in standby, being reserved. And this is an interesting sort of narrative about nuclear war. It's unclear how these would have ended if they were to ever have commenced. Uh, it's been said, I mean, this is just basic history. When nuclear strategies were first conceived of, they were conceived of as all or nothing notions. So during the era of, well, Truman, I guess towards the last year or so of the Truman administration, and then definitely throughout the Eisenhower administration, up to the Kennedy, they had, if I remember correctly, I think it was called the SIOP, the Single Integrated Operational Plan, although that may have been the term for it later. We're now seeing nuclear nuclear explosions across Russia, western or east, yeah, western part of Russia, and looks like others hitting Siberia and the inner hinterland. But yes, so in um, the initial conceptions of nuclear war developed by these so-called strategists of nuclear war, it was conceived as all or nothing. That is, once the orders were made, there would be no way to stop it, and the only notion was that you would basically there was a target list, and the target list, it was a morbid thing. The target lists were developed to each city, each target, which could have been like a piece of infrastructure, factory, military base, civilian cluster of some kind. Each of these had some sort of weight, and I don't know how those weights were calculated, but they were basically some sort of value with respect to you know, the overall objective, like whether this got, of the war, which I presume it was just to, I mean, that's another interesting question. What was the objective of nuclear war? I presume it would have been to stop, at least in the first few hours, any capacity of your adversary to engage in counterstrike, and that's what we sort of saw in the beginning of this scenario. Both sides, the Russian Federation and NATO, attempted to eliminate the land-based nuclear weapons, these silos. Um, but they both knew, and this is the case in history, both sides knew that that would not be enough, but you still had to attempt it. Um, and in fact, the reason why, at least for the United States, they put much of those silos in the Midwest and sort of the hinterland of the country was they were considered expendable. You don't want to put them, next to Manhattan or something like this because there's a lot of people that live there. There's a lot of money that's made in Manhattan or New York City. Um, Not as much money to be made in, I don't know. I'm not. I'm just. I don't. I don't want to name a Midwestern city to in fear that I would offend them. But we'll say, well, there is a normal Illinois, but there's just, let's pick actually. Let's use the UI of this software. I imagine there's just not a lot of. It looks like these are word weapons, so there's probably not a lot of people living in. Yeah, exactly. Great Falls. Great Falls. I am so ignorant. What state is that in? Great Falls. Let's see. I am. This is embarrassing. Let's see. That's Washington State. And is that Montana? Bozeman, I guess. Yeah. So, uh, to those individuals living in Montana, I do apologize. I do need to get up to your part of the country and explore more. I hear it's beautiful, but yeah, I presume not many people living there, and therefore it's a great place to put your silos because if it's destroyed, Well, you lost 66,000 people, but that's better than losing, I suppose, and I use this purely from this abstract calculation, is better than obviously losing 10 million people in New York State. But obviously, all lives matter in this case. But, or I'm sorry, that was not Montana. I think that was South. Was that South Dakota? I don't know. Okay, well, anyways, I it looks like there are weapons silos in the Dakotas and in Montana. There are weapon silos in other parts. Let's see. Pon- I'm not really sure. Can't really tell where, but yeah. So it looks like these clusters here, and clearly there aren't many people living. You don't want to put them here, the west coast or the east coast of the country, because that's where most of the people live. That's also where all the rivers are, and you have secondary infrastructure for traveling in case the roads are destroyed. You could at least you could transit logistics and other valuable equipment through river. So you want to keep those secured as much as possible. Now, Europe, I'm less certain about. I just don't grasp the topography and just sort of the human landscape of Europe as well. I presume most of it is densely populated, but I know that's not true. Just like the United States, everyone's pretty much clustered in the coasts and in the cities. But there you go. I'm not sure how insightful this was. Again, this is just sort of like an initial thought. I think this will be a very interesting tool once, for instance, these calculation UI is fixed. Uh, and there's a bunch of other options I suspect that I'm just not seeing. But yes, once these things are fixed, I think that these will be a very, very interesting. Yeah, do you see here? It says, let's see. Yeah, so clearly the author of this software has grand ambitions about what this thing could be, and I hope that that author satisfies these ambitions because if it is realized, this will be, I won't call it a game, although it is nominally titled a game. It will be a great tool, I think, for somber analysis of warfare, insofar, again, as we could call this nuclear warfare. Warfare. It's more like mass murder, to be frank. There's not much, it's not like the kind of warfare we would see in Warno or Steel Division. There's a pretense of brilliance of moving, columns of tanks from here to there and concealing them and holding things in reserve. I mean, as far as I can tell, much of the strategy is effectively just line itemization, figuring out where all the people are and figuring out how to get to those as fast as possible. So I guess in some sense there is some kind of analytic quote unquote strategy. Maybe it could all be reduced to standard optimization from a mathematical standpoint, but it is definitely something different altogether. But anyways, I hope you all, whoever my viewers are, I'm not really sure who listens to the channel, but for those of you who traditionally watch or typically go to this channel for Warno content, fear not, you're going to get something very, very interesting um, shortly along that and Steel Division stuff, as well as other sort of strategy games. But you know, I'm I am avidly working on some interesting modifications of both of those games, which I can't wait to display. And of course, both of those are the UGen publisher has an interesting set of map extensions and hopefully more modding tools in this new year. But we clearly know that nuclear weapons, at least tactical grade nuclear weapons, are coming for Warno, and we also know that large city maps or larger city maps are also coming for Warno. So this will be very fascinating for us. There's a whole lot of things I think we can do in the community to simulate things. Again, morbid but interesting things that I think people need to observe. Um, the things that I always try to do with Warno is to, even though it is a quote unquote computer game, I try to really show the conflict that would happen that is in Warno as it is, not sort of like a heroic portrayal of it. As I'm sure you know, those of you who are watching the Ukraine conflict, it's a very sad thing. It's a it's not. I mean, there are heroic acts that are made, but as a whole, um, it is a conflict that is just creating suffering. And I'm not sure if we can really, lionize the thing. I just hope that that it ends soon, and I hope that people's lives are somehow put back um, to something close to normality for those people involved. But getting back to something less depressing, yes, look forward to a lot of interesting things happening in the channel, and definitely more of this. As soon as they debug it, I am going to get on top of it, and we're going to have some